There is a real courtroom somewhere in America where grown adults in suits once spent years and a great deal of money arguing over the rights to a pretend burger restaurant that exists only at the bottom of a cartoon ocean. They were fighting over the Krusty Krab, a place that has never served a single real meal, and somehow that little fight is one of the gentler secrets hiding behind SpongeBob SquarePants. Tonight we are going to drift slowly through 10 of them. Quiet stories about the cheerful sponge under the sea, from a first episode that quietly vanished and an episode fans begged to have buried, to a country that feared him, a creator hidden inside the opening of every show, and a family bound together by something that should be impossible. None of it will keep you tense. The idea is to let your mind wander and your eyes grow heavy as the stories roll gently on. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get started. The Krusty Krab Trademark War. The most famous building in all of SpongeBob SquarePants is a small, crooked little restaurant called the Krusty Krab. It sits on the corner of a sandy street, shaped a bit like an old wooden trap that fishermen use to catch crabs, and it sells one thing above everything else: a burger known as the Krabby Patty. Almost the entire show circles back to that little place. SpongeBob spends his days there as the fry cook, thrilled beyond reason to flip patties all day long. Squidward stands at the front register, bored half to death. Mr. Krabs hides in the back, counting his coins and worrying about every penny. The restaurant has been part of the show since the very first episode aired back in 1999, and by the time it became famous, it had appeared in the large majority of the show's episodes, around 166 of the first 203, along with the movies. For a lot of fans, the Krusty Krab feels like a character all its own, just as alive as any of the talking sea creatures who walk through its doors. A place like that only exists inside the cartoon. There is no real Krusty Krab sitting on a real street where a hungry person can wander in and order a real Krabby Patty off a real menu. The restaurant lives on a screen and nowhere else in the world. And still, for a stretch of several years, that simple little fact grew into a genuine fight inside a genuine court of law. The whole thing started because someone out in the real world decided that they wanted to build the cartoon restaurant for real and put its name on an actual door. The story begins in the state of Texas with a company called IJR Capital Investment. Near the end of 2014, in the month of December, this company sent a request to the branch of the government that keeps track of business names. They were asking for the legal right to use the name The Krusty Krab for a restaurant of their own. Their plan was to open seafood places carrying that exact name, with spots they had in mind in both Texas and California. On the surface, it looked like any ordinary business trying to lock down a name before opening up shop. Companies do this kind of thing every single day, quietly and without any drama at all. There is a simple idea sitting underneath all of this, and understanding it makes the rest of the story easy to follow. When a business picks a name for itself, it can ask the government to protect that name so that no other business is allowed to use the same one for the same kind of work. The reason this protection exists is to keep regular customers from getting mixed up. If two burger shops in the same town shared one name, ordinary people would never be able to tell them apart, and one shop could quietly feed off the good reputation the other had worked hard to build. So the law lets a company hold tightly to its name and keep copycats from grabbing it. The Texas company was simply trying to grab the name The Krusty Krab before anyone else could. The man behind the Texas company was named Javier Ramos. Later on, when people asked him where the name had come from, he gave an answer that sounded innocent enough. He explained that the name came from the crust that forms on the shells of crabs when they are tossed into a big pot for a seafood boil. Somewhere along the way, though, he admitted something else. He admitted that he had become aware that the Krusty Krab was also the name of the restaurant in SpongeBob SquarePants. Knowing that did nothing to slow him down. He kept right on moving forward, holding on to the name and pushing his plan ahead, as though the cartoon connection did not matter one bit. That was the spark that set everything off. The company that owns SpongeBob, a very large media company called Viacom, caught wind of what was happening, and they had no interest in letting it slide. In their eyes, the Krusty Krab was theirs and theirs alone. The restaurant had been born inside their show. Its name had been printed on their toys, stitched onto their shirts, splashed across their posters, and tied to their characters for years and years on end. The thought of some other company turning that name into a real seafood spot with no permission and no connection to the cartoon sat very poorly with them. Late in 2015, around the month of November, Viacom sent the Texas company a stern warning letter. The letter asked them, plainly, to drop the name and to pull back their request to own it. The Texas company refused to do either. They wrote back and laid out their own side of things. They argued that Viacom did not actually put the name The Krusty Krab on any real restaurants, since the only Krusty Krab anywhere was a drawing inside a children's show. They argued that their seafood places would be different enough that no honest customer would ever get confused between a cartoon and a real diner. And with all that said, they declined to stop, keeping the name firmly in their hands. With the warning brushed aside, Viacom carried the whole matter into court. They asked a judge to declare that the Texas company held no real right to the name, and that using it would trample on something that already belonged to Viacom. Right here is where the case turned into something honestly strange because of one quiet little problem buried under the surface of it all. For all the long years the Krusty Krab had been part of the show, Viacom had never once locked the name down in the proper, official way. They had taken that careful step for plenty of other SpongeBob things, but never for this particular restaurant. So before they could win anything at all, they faced a harder job than usual. They had to prove that even without the official paperwork, the name was wrapped so tightly around them and known so widely as belonging to them that it counted as theirs anyway. The name had to be famous enough to speak for itself. The first big question the court needed to settle was whether a thing from inside a television show could even be owned in this way at all. Protecting the name of an entire show is one thing, and fairly normal. The Krusty Krab is something smaller than a whole show, though. It is only a single location that pops up inside the story, one spot among many. The judge decided that a thing like this can in fact be protected, so long as it is famous enough and bound tightly enough to whoever created it. To make the idea clear, the court reached for other invented things that people instantly tie back to a single source. They brought up kryptonite, the glowing green rock that drains the strength out of Superman, and they brought up the Daily Planet, the newspaper where Superman works his ordinary job. Both of those are completely made up. Both live only inside stories on a page or a screen, and yet both are so well known that nobody doubts who they belong to. The Krusty Krab, the court explained, sat in that very same group. To prove that everyday people truly did connect the name straight to SpongeBob, Viacom brought a survey into the case. Ordinary folks were asked what came to mind when they heard about a restaurant called the Krusty Krab. Around 3 out of every 10 believed that such a place would be run by Viacom or somehow tied to it. An even bigger group, more than a third of the people asked, linked the name to Viacom all on their own without anyone nudging them toward it. Those numbers carried real weight in the case. They showed, in plain terms, that if the Texas restaurant ever opened, a large slice of its customers would stroll inside assuming it had some link to the cartoon they grew up loving, when in truth it had none. Early in 2017, in the month of January, the judge handed down a decision, and it landed squarely on Viacom's side. The court agreed that the name belonged to Viacom even without the official paperwork, purely because the Krusty Krab had been such a famous and steady fixture of the show for so long. The court also agreed that a real restaurant wearing the same name would very likely leave customers confused about who was really standing behind it. On both of the main points that mattered, the cartoon company walked away the winner. The Texas company chose not to accept the loss quietly. They carried the case up to a higher court, the kind that takes a second look at a decision when one side feels strongly that the first judge made a mistake. They clung to their core argument, the claim that Viacom never truly owned the name to begin with. This higher court, which sits down in the city of New Orleans, studied the whole matter over again from top to bottom. In the end, it came to rest in the exact same place the first court had. In the spring of 2018, around May, the higher court agreed that the fictional restaurant, with its long and steady life inside the show and its heavy presence on toys and other products, did indeed belong to Viacom. The court pointed to all the things that made customer confusion so likely, including the sheer strength of the name, the way both sides spelled it and said it in precisely the same manner, the plain fact that both were talking about restaurants, and the proof that some people were already mixing up the two. The earlier decision was left standing, solid and unchanged. One small detail from the whole affair makes it feel a good deal less far-fetched than it might seem at first. Viacom is tied to a movie company, and that movie company had already taken a made-up restaurant from a famous film and turned it into a chain of real working ones. A seafood place that started life inside a beloved movie, the one about a kind man named Forrest, had become an actual restaurant chain called Bubba Gump that people could walk into and eat at. So the worry that a cartoon restaurant might be mistaken for an official Viacom project held real water. The company genuinely had a habit of pulling pretend eateries out of stories and building them brick by brick in the real world. Any customer who assumed the Krusty Krab might be the next one in that line would have had a fair reason to think so. There is a quieter question buried under this whole fight, one worth turning over slowly. Why would a giant company spend years and a small fortune chasing a single restaurant that had not even opened its doors yet? The Texas company was not stealing episodes or copying the show. They had simply picked a name and filed some paperwork. To a person watching from the outside, it might look like a huge business swatting at a fly, spending far more effort than the thing seemed to be worth. The answer lies in how names work, and in how much a name can quietly be worth once enough people love it. A name like the Krusty Krab is not just a word. After years on the air, after appearing on toys and shirts and posters and lunchboxes, the name carries a feeling with it. People hear it and instantly think of the warm little restaurant, the cheerful fry cook, the whole sunny world of the show. That instant connection is valuable, and it belongs to the company that built it. If another business could simply borrow that name for free, they would be taking something they never made, riding on a feeling that years of work had created. The law steps in to stop exactly that, and the company behind SpongeBob knew it had to defend the name or risk losing its grip on it. There is also a hard truth about protecting a name name that pushed the company to act. If a company lets one business use its name without a fight, it becomes much harder to stop the next one, and the one after that. A name that is not defended can slowly slip away until it no longer truly belongs to anyone in particular. So a company that wants to keep its name has to guard it firmly, even against something as small as a single restaurant that has not opened. Letting the Texas Krusty Krab slide could have cracked the door open for others, and once that door is open, it is very hard to close again. The fight was as much about every future copycat as it was about this one. Seen that way, the years of letters and surveys and courtrooms start to make more sense. The company was not really fighting one small restaurant. It was protecting the whole idea that the Krusty Krab and everything it makes people feel belongs to SpongeBob and to nobody else. The little cartoon restaurant had become so beloved, so tightly bound to the show in the minds of millions, that it had turned into something genuinely worth guarding. A pretend burger joint had grown valuable in the real world simply because so many people carried warm feelings for it. And feelings, once enough people share them, can be worth fighting for, even when the thing they are attached to has never cooked a single real burger. The most curious part of the whole story is just how serious it all became in the end. A burger joint that exists only as a cartoon drawing, a place run by a money-hungry crab and staffed by a cheerful sponge, somehow ended up at the dead center of warning letters, surveys, judges, and a higher court. Grown adults in suits argued back and forth for years over the right to a name first dreamed up to make small children giggle. The Krusty Krab never cooked a single real meal. It never opened a single real door, and somehow it still managed to win a real legal battle, twice over, defended by a giant company that treated the silly little restaurant as something genuinely worth fighting to protect. That wide gap, sitting between a goofy underwater cartoon and the heavy seriousness of a real courtroom, runs quietly through almost every story tied to this show. The top layer is bright, gentle, and made for kids. Just beneath that layer hides something far more grown-up than a child watching the show would ever guess. A pretend restaurant turned out to be worth so much that real lawyers spent years fighting over it, which says a great deal about how enormous SpongeBob had grown by the time all this happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The battle over the Krusty Krab was a story about keeping a name safe and out of the wrong hands. The company behind the show, though, has also done the very opposite over the years, quietly holding pieces of SpongeBob back from the very fans who wanted them most. The first episode ever made, the one that started the whole adventure, slipped off store shelves for years and became surprisingly hard to find, and the reason traced all the way back to a single old song humming softly in the background. Section 2. The pilot they pulled from your DVDs. Every long story has a first page, and every television show has a first episode. For SpongeBob SquarePants, that first episode is called Help Wanted. It is the one that introduced the whole world to a cheerful yellow sponge who wanted nothing more than a job. In it, SpongeBob walks into the Krusty Krab hoping to become a fry cook, and he runs straight into the doubts of Squidward and the greed of Mr. Krabs, who hands him an almost impossible test before he can earn the work. It is the beginning of everything. The small spark that grew into one of the most beloved cartoons ever made. A person would think that the very first episode of a show this huge would be the easiest one in the world to find. For a long stretch of years, though, it was actually one of the hardest. To understand why, a person has to know a little about how the episode was made and what was hiding inside it. Near the very end of Help Wanted, there is a scene where a massive crowd of hungry little fish, drawn as a swarm of wriggling shapes, descends on the Krusty Krab desperate for food. SpongeBob saves the day by firing out Krabby Patties at incredible speed, feeding the entire mob in a wild burst of cooking. Playing underneath that whole happy scene is a bouncy, sunny little song about living in the sunlight and loving in the moonlight, all about having a wonderful time. The song fits the joyful chaos of the moment perfectly. It is light, it is silly, and it lifts the scene right up. That song is the reason the episode would later vanish. The tune itself was old, far older than the cartoon. It had first been written back in 1930 for a movie, dreamed up by two songwriters named Al Sherman and Al Lewis. Decades after that, in 1968, a very unusual performer recorded his own version of it. This performer went by the stage name Tiny Tim, and he was famous for singing in a high, fluttery voice while strumming a small stringed instrument called a ukulele. His version of the song was strange and cheerful and instantly recognizable, the kind of thing a person never quite forgets after hearing it once. That recording, the one Tiny Tim made in 1968, is the exact version that ended up playing inside Help Wanted. Here is where the timing of it all turns a little sad and a little strange. Tiny Tim died at the end of November in 1996 after suffering a heart attack while performing on a stage in the cold of Minnesota. He was 64 years old. Around that very same stretch of time, the crew of SpongeBob SquarePants was hard at work writing their pilot episode. They reached for his recording of that old song and dropped it into the scene. The trouble was that they used it without getting proper permission from the people who looked after Tiny Tim's estate after his passing. The man himself had no idea his song would appear in a cartoon since he was already gone, and the people who handled his affairs Bears had not signed off on it either. The song went into the episode anyway, and at the time, nobody seemed to think much of it. The episode aired and the show took off like a rocket. SpongeBob grew bigger and bigger, and before long, fans wanted to own the episodes for themselves, to keep at home and watch whenever they pleased. Back in those days, the way a person did that was by buying a DVD, a shiny disc that held a bunch of episodes packed together in a single box set. The company behind the show began releasing these box sets season by season, so that families could collect the whole adventure shelf by shelf. When the time came to release the very first season though, a quiet problem appeared, and it had everything to do with that old song. Putting a song into a television episode is one thing, but selling that same episode on a disc that people pay money for is treated very differently. Once a company starts selling something and making money from it, the people who own the rights to any song inside it usually expect to be paid their fair share. The recording of the song by Tiny Tim belonged to his estate, the group that managed everything he left behind. For the episode to be sold on a DVD, the company behind SpongeBob would have needed to pay that estate for the right to keep the song in there. According to a man named Derek Dryman, who helped guide the making of that early episode, the company simply did not want to pay Tiny Tim's estate for those rights. They looked at the cost and decided it was not worth it, so they made a quiet, surprising choice. Rather than pay for the song or go to the trouble of swapping it out for a different one, they left the entire first episode off the DVD altogether. The box set for the first season came out without its own first episode inside it. Every other episode from that season was there, all lined up and ready to watch, except the one that had started it all. Help Wanted became the single episode from the first season missing from those discs. A fan could buy the whole box, bring it home, and discover that the beginning of the story was simply not there. It was a strange gap, like buying a book and finding the opening chapter torn out before the rest. For a while, this left fans in an odd spot. The episode they most wanted, the one that launched their favorite show, was the one they could not easily get their hands on. It was not gone from the world entirely, since it still aired on television now and then, but the convenient way of owning it had a hole in it where the first episode should have sat. People who loved the show and wanted to collect it properly found themselves missing the most important piece, all because of a few cheerful seconds of an old song from long before the cartoon ever existed. The episode did not stay buried forever though. The company eventually found a way to bring it to fans, and the path they chose was a roundabout one. In the year 2005, when the box set for the third season was released, Help Wanted finally appeared, tucked inside as a bonus feature. It was not placed where it naturally belonged, sitting at the front of the first season where the story actually begins. Instead, it was treated as an extra treat hidden inside a later collection, a special little gift for fans who bought the third season set. It was a curious way to handle the most historic episode of the entire show, sliding it in sideways years after it should have arrived, but at last it gave people an official way to own it. There is a clever little detail about why this song caused so much trouble in the first place. Across the whole long run of SpongeBob, the music in the background is almost always made up of plain, ready-to-use tunes that the company already had full freedom to use however they liked. These are simple pieces of music with no famous singer attached and no estate waiting in the wings to ask for payment. The Tiny Tim song was different from all of that. It was the one piece of well-known outside music tied to a real and famous performer that ever found its way into the show in that early stretch. That difference is exactly what made it such a headache. A plain background tune would never have caused a single problem. A song belonging to a famous musician's estate caused enough trouble to keep the first episode off the shelves. The whole situation also reveals something about how the people behind the show were learning as they went. When they made that pilot, SpongeBob was not a giant yet. It was a small, untested idea, a gamble that might easily have failed and disappeared like so many other shows do. In those early days, dropping a beloved old song into a scene probably felt harmless, the kind of thing nobody would ever fuss over. Nobody could have guessed that the little sponge would explode into a worldwide sensation, and that every tiny choice made in that first episode would suddenly matter a great deal once real money started flowing in. A casual decision made by a hopeful young crew turned into a years-long snag once the show became famous enough that every song inside it carried a price tag. It is worth taking a slow moment to picture how unusual this really was. The most important episode of one of the most popular cartoons on the planet, the literal starting point of the whole journey, was kept off its own home release for years. Not because anything in it was rude or scary or unfit for children, not because the network was ashamed of it or wanted to hide it from young eyes. It was held back purely over money and permission, over a single happy song humming along under a scene about feeding hungry fish. A grumpy joke or a frightening image might have explained a missing episode. This time, the culprit was a cheerful little ukulele tune from decades earlier. The story of the song stretched out in small ways even beyond the DVDs. In certain countries where the show was translated into other languages, that same song was quietly cut or swapped for something else, most likely for the very same reasons of rights and permission. In one country, the cheerful tune was replaced with an instrumental version of the theme song from a completely different cartoon. In another, the scene was simply trimmed, so the trouble the song caused was not limited to one box set in one country. It rippled outward, popping up here and there around the world, wherever the show traveled, and wherever the question of who owned that music came up again. For the youngest fans who came along later, all of this created a small and quiet gap in their experience of the show. A child discovering SpongeBob through those early DVDs would have started watching from the second episode without even realizing that the true first one was missing. They would have met SpongeBob already working at the Krusty Krab, never seeing the moment he first walked in and fought for the job. The beginning of the story quietly slipped past a whole group of viewers, not because anyone wanted to keep it from them, but because a song stood in the way of it being included. The opening of the tale became a piece that many fans only caught up on much later, if they ever caught up on it at all. Eventually, the wider world of streaming changed how people watched everything, and the episode became far easier to find than it had been during those DVD years. Even in recent times, the show's official channels online have shared pieces of that historic first episode, treating it as the cherished beginning it always was. The years when it sat just out of reach faded into a piece of trivia, a strange little chapter in the show's history that most modern viewers never even knew about. The episode that was once the hardest to own slowly became one more thing a fan could simply call up and watch, the way it probably should have been all along. What makes this whole story stick in the mind is how small the cause was compared to how big the effect turned out to be. A single song, only a few seconds long, kept the most important episode of a massive show out of the hands of paying fans for years. The cartoon never changed, the episode never changed. Only the rules around one old tune stood between viewers and the very start of the story they love. It is a reminder that even the sunniest, simplest show carries hidden tangles underneath it, knots of money and permission and ownership that a young viewer would never imagine while laughing at a sponge flipping burgers. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first episode going missing was an accident of money and music, a quiet snag that nobody planned and nobody truly meant any harm by. Some of the trouble the show ran into later on came from a very different place though. Now and then, an episode aired that left a bad taste in the mouths of the people watching. A story so dark or so cruel in its tone that fans turned against it in large numbers, begging for it to be taken away. One episode in particular crossed a line that a great many viewers felt a cheerful cartoon should never have gone near at all. Section 3. One Course Meal. The episode that went too far. Most episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants feel like a warm afternoon. The characters bicker, somebody hatches a silly plan, things go wrong in goofy ways, and by the end, everyone is more or less fine again. Even when a character gets bonked, blown up, or launched across town, the show treats it lightly, the way cartoons always have, and the viewer knows in their heart that nobody is truly hurt. That gentle, bouncy spirit is a big part of why the show comforts so many people. There is one episode, though, that broke away from all of that. It went to a place so heavy and so mean-spirited that a large number of fans decided it should never have been made, and to this day they point to it as the worst thing the show ever put on screen. The episode is from the 7th season, and it is called One Course Meal. To understand why it upset so many people, a person first needs to know the two characters at the center of it. Mr. Krabs is the greedy crab who owns the Krusty Krab. Plankton is his tiny rival, a small green creature who runs a failing restaurant directly across the street called the Chum Bucket. For the entire history of the show, these two have been locked in a long, silly feud. Plankton is forever scheming to steal the secret recipe for the Krabby Patty, and Mr. Krabs is forever stopping him. It is a back-and-forth battle that the show usually plays for laugh, with Plankton coming up with some clever trick and then failing in a funny way at the last second. Plankton loses constantly, but he always picks himself back up and tries again. That is simply who he is. In One Course Meal, that familiar, harmless feud takes a sharp and ugly turn. Mr. Krabs discovers a secret about Plankton, a deep and powerful fear. Plankton is terrified of whales. Once Mr. Krabs learns this, he does not use it for a quick joke and then move on. He decides to use it as a weapon. He dresses himself up to look like his own daughter, Pearl, who happens to be a whale, and he uses this disguise to frighten Plankton over and over again. He does not do it once or twice. He keeps it going, scaring the tiny creature again and again until Plankton is worn down into a state of pure terror and misery. The trouble is the place this scaring eventually drives Plankton to. The relentless fear pushes him past his breaking point, into a dark and hopeless mood where he no longer wants to go on. The episode shows him sinking into a deep gloom, and then it shows him doing something genuinely alarming for a children's cartoon. He lies down in the middle of the road, having given up entirely, waiting for the worst to happen. It is a moment of real despair, the kind of thing the show had never gone near before, and it is played in a way that is deeply uncomfortable to sit through. What pushed fans over the edge was not only the dark moment itself, but how Mr. Krabs reacts to it. A normal person, even a grumpy one, would feel at least a flicker of guilt at seeing what they had done to someone. Mr. Krabs feels nothing of the sort. When he is told that Plankton is lying in the street, defeated and forlorn, he does not soften question or feel sorry. He laughs. He treats the whole terrible situation as a delight, glad that his rival has been broken so completely. The character who caused all this misery walks away pleased with himself, never punished in any real way, and never sorry for a moment. SpongeBob, normally the kind heart of the show, also fails to fix things and ends up helping push Plankton down even further. That combination is what set off the anger. The show had taken a character that fans had laughed at and rooted for over many years, dragged him into a place of real hopelessness through cruel and repeated bullying, and then let the bully laugh about it and get away clean. There was no comforting lesson at the end. There was no moment where anyone learned that what they did was wrong. The story simply allowed the cruelty to win, and it asked the audience to find this funny. For an enormous number of viewers, it was not funny at all. It was disturbing. The reaction from fans was loud and lasting. Across the places where people gather online to talk about the show, one course meal became known as something close to the lowest point the series ever reached. Fans described it as widely hated and pointed to it again and again as one of the worst episodes the show ever made. The complaints all circled the same core problem. Plankton was tormented far past anything he had ever done to deserve it, driven into genuine despair, and nobody in the story took his suffering seriously. The whole thing was wrapped in a tone that felt less like playful rivalry and more like watching someone be crushed for sport. The hatred for the episode did not fade away with time, either. Years after it first aired, it kept showing up near the very bottom of lists, ranking every SpongeBob episode from best to worst. On one well-known website where viewers score episodes, it sits with one of the lowest ratings in the entire series, a tiny number that marks it as something fans actively dislike rather than simply find boring. A popular video countdown of the worst SpongeBob episodes, put together in recent years, placed one course meal right at the #1 spot, naming it the single worst episode of them all. For a show with hundreds and hundreds of episodes stretching across decades, earning the title of the very worst is a heavy thing. The anger even grew organized. People who felt strongly about the episode started a petition, a kind of public list that anyone can sign to show they agree with a request. This particular petition asked the company behind the show to ban the episode outright, to pull it from circulation and stop showing it. The people behind the petition explained their reasons plainly. They felt the episode had driven Plankton to a place of genuine despair, that Mr. Krabs had been shown almost as a hero despite his cruelty, and that he had faced no real consequences for what he had done. The fact that fans cared enough to gather signatures and beg for an episode to disappear shows just how deeply this one struck a nerve. It helps to step back and look at why this episode landed so much harder than the usual cartoon roughhousing. SpongeBob has always been full of characters getting hurt in silly ways. Squidward gets crushed and flattened. Mr. Krabs gets bonked. Plankton himself gets squished flat under a foot more times than anyone could count. And it is normally good for a laugh because everyone understands it is not real and does not truly matter. One course meal felt different because it was not about a quick physical bonk that heals in a second. It reached into something emotional and genuinely sad, a character losing all hope, and it lingered there instead of bouncing away. Physical cartoon pain washes off instantly. The kind of deep sadness this episode showed does not, and that is exactly why it felt so wrong sitting inside a show meant to comfort children. There is also the matter of who Plankton normally is in the show, and how strangely this episode treated him. Plankton is usually a villain, the bad guy scheming to ruin Mr. Krabs. A villain getting beaten is a normal part of any story. The problem is that one course meal flipped the roles around so completely that Plankton stopped feeling like a villain at all. He became the one the audience felt sorry for, the small creature being hounded mercilessly, while Mr. Krabs, usually the more likable of the two, became something genuinely unpleasant. Many fans noticed this reversal and found it hard to stomach. The show had quietly turned its lovable money-grubbing crab into something far darker, and it did not seem fully aware of what it had done. A curious thing about this episode is that, even with all the controversy, a few people have argued in its defense over the years. Some viewers point out that within the world of the cartoon, nothing truly bad could ever actually happen, since the show always snaps back to normal and every character survives anything. From that angle, they argue, the dark moments were never meant to be taken as seriously as upset fans took them. Others have suggested that Mr. Krabs was not laughing out of pure cruelty, but simply out of relief that his troublesome rival would finally leave him alone. These defenses exist, and they are worth knowing about, but they have always been the minority view. The far larger reaction was one of discomfort and dislike, and that reaction is what the episode is remembered for. It is also worth noting where this episode fell in the life of the show. By the 7th season, SpongeBob had been on the air for a long time, and many longtime fans felt the show had drifted away from the gentle brilliance of its earliest years. Episodes from this stretch are often pointed to as proof that something had changed in the show's heart, that the warmth of the early seasons had given way at times to meanness or grossness. One course meal became a kind of poster child for those worries. To fans who felt the show had lost its way, this episode was the clearest example, the moment where the drift had carried it somewhere it it never should have gone. Pulling back even further, this whole situation says something interesting about the bond between a show and the people who love it. Fans do not simply watch a beloved cartoon, they come to feel a sense of ownership over it, a feeling that they know what the show is supposed to be and how its characters are supposed to behave. When an episode betrays that feeling, when it takes a character somewhere fans believe he never should have gone, the reaction is not a shrug, it is hurt and sometimes anger. The fury over one-course meal was really the fury of people who cared deeply, who held the show to a standard, and who felt that standard had been broken. A person does not start a petition over a show they feel nothing for. They start one over a show they love that has, in their eyes, let them down. The episode still exists. It was never actually banned, despite the petitions and the complaint. It remains part of the long library of the show, available to anyone who goes looking for it, sitting there as a permanent reminder of the day SpongeBob reached too far into the dark. Most people who stumble across it now do so precisely because of its bad reputation, curious to see for themselves whether it really is as grim as everyone says. In that way, the very anger that surrounded it gave it a strange kind of fame, turning an episode many wished would disappear into one of the most talked about in the entire series. That same gap keeps appearing through every part of this larger story, the gap between a cheerful, candy-colored surface and something heavier waiting just beneath it. One course meal is the moment that gap cracked wide open inside an actual episode, where the darkness was not hidden in a clever name or a buried joke, but placed right there on the screen for everyone to see. The cheerful sponge and the gloomy despair shared the same frame, and a great many people decided the show had no business mixing the two. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The unhappiness over this episode all swirled around the characters and the choices the writers made for them. Behind the cartoon, though, sat real people whose own lives quietly shaped the show in ways most fans never noticed. The wife of the man who created SpongeBob, and the husbands and wives of the people who gave the characters their voices, left fingerprints all over Bikini Bottom, hiding their own names and personalities inside the very creatures children watched every day. Section 4. The real people hidden in the cast. Every character in SpongeBob SquarePants feels invented, pulled straight out of someone's imagination, and dropped into a world under the sea. A talking sponge, a dim starfish, a greedy crab, a tiny green schemer. None of them seem like they could be based on anyone real. And yet, scattered all through Bikini Bottom, there are pieces of real people quietly tucked inside the cartoon. Names borrowed from loved ones, personalities lifted from real marriages, voices belonging to people whose own lives mirrored the characters they played in surprising ways. Once a person knows where to look, the show stops feeling like something dreamed up from nothing and starts feeling like a place built out of the lives of the people who made it. The clearest example sits inside the Chum Bucket, the rundown little restaurant where Plankton plots his endless schemes. Plankton is not alone in there. He has a partner, a computer with a flat screen for a face and a calm, clever voice, who hangs on the wall and helps him come up with his plans. Her name is Karen. She is the brains of the operation, the one who actually thinks up the smart ideas, even though Plankton usually grabs all the credit for himself. The two of them are married, a tiny green creature wedded to a talking machine, and their constant bickering is one of the quiet running jokes of the show. Karen the computer was not given her name by accident. She was named after a real woman, Karen Hillenburg, the wife of the man who created the entire show, Steven Hillenburg. This was a small, personal gift hidden right in the middle of the cartoon, the creator slipping his own wife's name into one of his characters. And it went deeper than just the name. Steven called his wife the funniest person he knew, and it was her particular sense of humor, sharp and a little sarcastic, that shaped the way the cartoon Karen talks and behaves. So the dry, clever, slightly teasing way that the computer speaks to Plankton came straight from a real marriage. A real woman's wit was poured into a fictional machine, and most of the children laughing at Karen never had the faintest idea. There is an even sweeter twist buried in this story. When the show was first being put together, the plan was for the real Karen Hillenburg to actually provide the voice of the character named after her. It would have been a perfect circle, the real woman speaking through the cartoon that carried her name and her humor. But things did not go that way. On the day of the very first recording session, the real Karen grew so nervous standing there ready to perform that she could not get a single line out. The words simply would not come. Faced with that, the show needed someone else to step in and become the voice of Karen, and the person they found brought a whole new layer of real-life connection along with her. The new voice of Karen belonged to an actress named Jill Talley. What makes her casting so interesting is who she happens to be married to in real life. Jill Talley is the wife of Tom Kenny, and Tom Kenny is the man who voices SpongeBob himself. So think about what that means for a moment. The cheerful yellow sponge and the calm computer, married to Plankton, are voiced in the real world by a husband and wife, two characters who almost never share a friendly moment in the show, who live on opposite sides of the great Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket rivalry, are brought to life by two people who go home to the same house at the end of the day. The feud between the restaurants is performed, in part, by a real married couple. Tom Kenny is worth pausing on because his voice is everywhere in the show. show, far beyond just SpongeBob. He is the beating heart of the cartoon's sound, the one who gives SpongeBob that high, joyful, slightly squeaky laugh that an entire generation can recognize in an instant. The energy that pours out of SpongeBob, the relentless cheerfulness, the way he greets every single morning as though it were the best day of his life, all of that flows out of one real person standing in a recording booth, throwing himself completely into the part. The character feels so alive because the man behind him gives him so much. These hidden links between the real people and the characters they play turn the whole show into something layered and personal. The creator's wife lives on in a computer. The creator's wife's humor shapes how that computer speaks. The sponge and the computer are voiced by a husband and wife. Piece by piece, the cartoon was stitched together out of the lives of the people closest to it, their names and personalities, and even their marriages woven quietly into the fabric of Bikini Bottom. A show that looks like pure invention turns out to be partly a portrait of the small circle of people who built it. The naming did not stop with Karen, either. The man who created SpongeBob had a habit of building his characters out of real things he knew and loved. And nowhere is this clearer than in how he designed the cast around actual sea creatures. Steven Hillenburg was not only a cartoonist. Before he ever made the show, he had trained in marine science, the study of the ocean and the animals that live in it, and he had even worked teaching people about sea life. That deep love of the ocean soaked into every character he drew. SpongeBob is a sponge, a real kind of simple sea animal. Patrick is a starfish, also known as a sea star. Mr. Krabs is a crab. Plankton is named after the tiny drifting specks of life that float through real ocean water. Each main character was built on top of a real creature from the sea the creator knew so well. That careful, knowing approach to the ocean even shaped the personalities. Plankton, for instance, is small and weak in the show, forever getting squished and brushed aside. And that fits the real thing, because real plankton are among the tiniest forms of life in the sea. The creator used what he knew about actual ocean animals and let it guide who his characters would be. The greed, the cheerfulness, the schemes, all of it sat on top of a real foundation of marine life. The show was, in a quiet way, a marine scientist sharing his love of the sea, dressed up as a comedy about a talking sponge. There is one more real-life thread worth pulling, and it runs through the music of the show. The famous opening of SpongeBob SquarePants begins with a painted pirate who sings the theme song, asking if the kids are ready before launching into the tune everyone knows. That pirate has a mouth that moves in a strange, almost real way, because it is a real mouth, a pair of actual human lips filmed and placed onto the painting. And those lips belong to none other than Steven Hillenburg himself, the creator of the show. Every single time that opening plays, the mouth singing along is the real mouth of the man who dreamed the whole thing up. He is hidden in plain sight, performing in his own creation, in front of the eyes of every viewer who ever watched the show begin. Once these connections start adding up, a picture forms of how close-knit and personal the making of this show truly was. The creator hid his wife in a character and his own face in the opening. He built his cast out of the sea animals he had spent years studying and loving. He surrounded himself with people whose real lives became tangled into the cartoon in ways the audience never saw. The voice of the hero and the voice of the villain's wife were married in real life. The show was made by a small group of people who clearly cared about it deeply, and they left little pieces of themselves scattered all through it, like signatures hidden in the corners of a painting. It is the kind of thing that makes a person look at the show differently once they know it. A child watching Karen the computer argue with Plankton sees nothing more than a funny robot wife. A person who knows the story sees the creator's real wife, her humor preserved inside a machine, voiced by the real-life spouse of the man playing SpongeBob. The cartoon does not change at all. The knowledge changes everything about how it feels to watch. Layers that were always there, quietly humming under the surface, suddenly become visible, and the show grows richer for it. These hidden details also reveal something about why the show feels so warm to so many people. A cartoon assembled coldly by strangers who did not care tends to feel hollow no matter how bright its colors are. SpongeBob feels like it has a soul, and a big part of that comes from how personal it was for the people who made it. The creator was not just filling time, he was pouring his own life into the work, his marriage, his face, his years of loving the ocean, his closest friends and their talent. That care leaks through the screen. The viewer cannot name exactly what they are feeling, but they sense that the show was made by people who meant it, and the hidden real-life pieces are the proof of that care sitting right there in the cartoon. There is a gentle irony in how invisible all of this stayed for so long. The show became one of the most watched cartoons in the entire world, seen by hundreds of millions of people across many countries and many years, and almost none of those hundreds of millions knew that the computer's name honored the creator's wife, or that the hero and the villain's partner were married off-screen, or that the singing pirate wore the creator's own mouth. The personal touches were everywhere, hiding in the most famous cartoon on the planet, and they slipped right past nearly everyone. The creator and his crew planted these small, loving secrets and then let them sit quietly, waiting for the rare, curious fan to dig them up. That quiet pattern of meaning hidden just below a cheerful surface runs through this whole story from start to finish. Here, the hidden layer was not dark or troubling, it was was tender. It was the fingerprints of real, loving people pressed gently into the work they cared about. A wife's humor, a husband and wife playing rivals, a creator's own face singing the opening of his life's great creation. The surface was a silly cartoon for kids, and underneath it sat a small, warm story about the real people who brought it to life and could not resist leaving a piece of themselves behind. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Those real people built their cast out of real sea creatures, naming each one for the animal it was based on. They got nearly every one of them right, matching the character to its true ocean counterpart with the care of someone who genuinely knew the sea. But there is one famous character whose name does not match what he actually is, a creature millions of people have called by the wrong kind of animal for the entire life of the show, and the truth about what he really is hides a few strange secrets of its own. Section 5. Squidward isn't a squid. There is a character in SpongeBob SquarePants that almost everyone gets wrong, and they get him wrong because of his own name. He is the grumpy neighbor who lives in the gloomy stone house between SpongeBob and Patrick. He plays the clarinet badly, paints pictures of himself, works the cash register at the Krusty Krab with a permanent look of misery on his face, and spends most of his life wishing the two cheerful idiots next door would leave him alone. His name is Squidward, and for the entire run of the show, a name with the word squid sitting right inside it has fooled millions of people into believing they know exactly what kind of animal he is. The trouble is that the name is wrong. Squidward is not a squid at all. Squidward is an octopus. This is not a guess, and it is not a fan theory cooked up online. It came straight from Steven Hillenburg, the man who created the show and designed every one of its characters. He confirmed plainly that the grumpy neighbor everyone calls a squid was always meant to be an octopus. So the most basic fact that people think they know about Squidward, the one tucked right into his name, turns out to be a mistake that an entire audience has been making for decades. They look at him, they hear squid in his name, and they fill in the rest without ever stopping to check whether it lines up. The reason behind this strange choice is genuinely interesting, and it reveals how carefully the show was put together. When Hillenburg was designing the character, he wanted the grumpy neighbor to look a certain way, and the shape of an octopus suited that idea better than the shape of a squid. The key was the head. An octopus has a large, round, bulbous head, big and bulging at the top. Hillenburg liked that shape for this particular character because of who the character was meant to be on the inside. Squidward thinks he is smart. He believes he is a great artist, a brilliant musician, a refined and intelligent soul trapped in a town full of fools. A character who thinks of himself as a big-brained genius, Hillenburg reasoned, ought to have a big, bulging head to match. The large round head of the octopus was the perfect visual joke for a character so puffed up about his own intelligence. So the design came first, built around the personality. Hillenburg wanted that proud, swollen, intellectual head, and the octopus gave it to him. The squid simply did not have the right shape for the joke he was making. The whole look of Squidward, his most recognizable feature, that great rounded head sitting on top of his body, exists because the creator wanted to quietly poke fun at how highly the character thinks of himself. Every time Squidward sniffs that he is too sophisticated for Bikini Bottom, his very head is part of the gag, a big bulbous symbol of his big bulbous ego. There is a second strange detail hiding in Squidward's design, and most people never notice it until it is pointed out. A real octopus has 8 arms. That is the whole point of an octopus, the thing that makes it an octopus, those 8 curling limbs. Squidward, though, does not have 8, he has 6. He walks around on what looks like a small set of legs, and if a person actually stops and counts them, the number comes up short of what an octopus should have. So Squidward is not only mislabeled by his name, he is also missing 2 of the limbs that would make him a proper octopus in the first place. The reason for the missing limbs is far less mysterious than it sounds. It came down to the simple work of drawing him over and over again. Animating a cartoon means drawing a character thousands upon thousands of times, in every pose and every scene, frame after frame after frame. 8 wiggling arms would have meant 8 things to draw and keep track of in every single shot. A real headache for the artists tasked with bringing him to life day in and day out. Hillenburg decided it was simply easier to give him 6 limbs instead of 8. Fewer arms meant less work, cleaner drawings, and a character who was quicker to animate. So Squidward lost 2 arms purely for the sake of making the artist's jobs a little less grueling. He is an octopus drawn the easy way. This puts Squidward in a funny middle place. His name says squid. His design says octopus, but an octopus missing a couple of arms. He is, in a sense, not quite a squid, and not quite a textbook octopus either. A creature shaped by jokes and shortcuts rather than by any real-world animal, sitting perfectly still as a model. He is whatever the show needed him to be in the moment it was making him. A big-headed grump with a manageable number of legs, and the name stuck even though it never fit, because Squidward simply sounded right, even if it pointed at the wrong creature. The strangeness of Squidward becomes even sharper when a person looks at the rest of the main cast, because nearly everyone else in the show is named with perfect honesty. SpongeBob is a sponge, a real and simple kind of sea animal, and his name says so right out loud. Patrick is a starfish, also called a sea star, and the show calls him Patrick Star, the name telling the truth plainly. Mr. Krabs is a crab. Plankton is named after the tiny floating specks of life that drift through real ocean water, and he is indeed tiny and easily brushed aside, just like the real thing. Up and down the cast, the names match the creatures. The creator clearly cared about getting these things right, since he had trained in marine science and knew the ocean deeply. He gave each character the honest name of its true animal. Squidward is the odd one out in that careful lineup. In a cast where every name tells the truth about what the creature is, his name tells a small lie. The team behind the show knew he was an octopus, and they named him after a squid anyway, choosing the look they wanted over the label that would have been correct. There is even a simple reason the squid name won out in the end. A squid and an octopus are close cousins in the real ocean, similar creatures swimming in the same family of sea life, so reaching for the Squidward was an easy and natural fit. And the alternatives, the names a person might build out of the word octopus, simply did not sound as good rolling off the tongue. Squidward had a ring to it that the octopus versions never managed. The sound of the name beat out the accuracy of it. There is one more member of the main cast worth mentioning here, because she breaks the pattern in a completely different direction. Sandy is not a sea creature at all. She is a squirrel, a land animal, living deep underwater inside a glass dome full of air, wearing a special suit whenever she steps outside it. While SpongeBob and Patrick and Mr. Krabs all match the ocean creatures they are based on, Sandy is the one main character who comes from dry land entirely. So the cast has two oddities sitting inside it: Squidward, whose name points at the wrong sea creature, and Sandy, who is not a sea creature in the first place. Everyone else lines up neatly with the real animals of the ocean, just as the creator intended. Knowing all of this changes the way a person watches the show. Squidward stops being a simple grumpy squid and becomes something a little richer, a character whose entire look was crafted as a quiet joke about his own swollen pride, an octopus in everything but name, drawn with two arms missing to spare the artist some trouble. The grumpiness, the snooty attitude, the belief that he is too good for the world around him, all of it is mirrored in that big round head the creator gave him on purpose. The design and the personality were built together, each one feeding the other, and the wrong name riding on top was simply the price of picking a word that sounded right. It also says something about how the show was made, this willingness to bend the truth for the sake of a better cartoon. The creator knew his sea creatures cold. He could have named the character correctly without a second thought. He chose instead to put the look and the laugh first, to give Squidward the head that made the joke land and the name that sounded good in a child's mouth, even though both choices quietly broke from reality. The show was made by someone who understood the ocean deeply, and yet was perfectly willing to set that knowledge aside whenever the comedy called for it. That balance between real knowledge and pure silliness is a big part of what made the show feel both clever and fun at the same time. There is a small lesson buried in the whole Squidward mix-up about how easily a name can fool a person into thinking they understand something. Millions of people have looked at Squidward, read the squid sitting in his name, and felt certain they knew what he was. They never counted his arms, they never questioned the shape of his head. They simply trusted the label and moved on, carrying a wrong belief around for years without ever realizing it. The truth was sitting right there in plain view the entire time, in the round head and the 6 legs, waiting for anyone who cared to actually look closely instead of trusting the name. It is a tiny reminder that the obvious answer and the true answer are not always the same thing. That same theme keeps surfacing through every part of this larger story. The show presents one thing on its bright and simple surface, and something more complicated waits just underneath for anyone willing to dig. Here, the hidden truth was a small and almost playful one, a beloved character who is not the animal his name claims, shaped by jokes and shortcuts rather than by the rules of real biology. The surface said squid. The reality was a big-headed, 6-armed octopus, named for the look and the sound rather than the truth, hiding his real nature behind a word that simply felt right. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The little tricks tucked into Squidward's design were the work of a creator having fun, bending a few facts to make a sharper, funnier character. Other people, though, have looked at this cheerful cartoon and found something far more serious staring back at them. Some have studied the Krusty Krab, the secret recipe, the greedy crab, and the cheerful worker who never asks for more, and they have come away convinced that the whole show is quietly making a sharp point about money, work, and who really holds the power, a hidden message about the way the world itself is built. Section 6. The Communist Crab. A great many people have watched SpongeBob SquarePants and seen nothing more than a happy cartoon about a sponge who loves his job. There is another group, though, made up of grown-up viewers, college students, writers, and even a few serious scholars who have stared at the same show and seen something else entirely. To them, SpongeBob is quietly telling a story about money, work, and power. They believe the cartoon is secretly making a sharp point about the way the world is built, about who does the work and who keeps the reward, hidden underneath all the burgers and bubbles. And once a person hears the idea laid out, it becomes very hard to watch the Krusty Krab the same way ever again. To follow this theory, a person first needs a simple picture of the idea it leans on. A long time ago, a thinker named Karl Marx wrote a great deal about how money and work shape society. One of his core ideas was that the world tends to split into two groups. On one side sit the people who own the businesses, the factories, the shops, the places where work happens. On the other side sit the people who actually do the work but own none of it. The owners are sometimes called the bosses, and the workers are the ones who show up, labor all day, and take home only a small slice of what they help create. Marx argued that the owner gets rich precisely because the worker is paid far less than the value of what the worker makes. The gap between what the worker earns and what the worker produces is where the owner's wealth comes from. Hold that idea in mind, then look at the Krusty Krab, and the pieces start to line up in a way that is honestly a little startling. Mr. Krabs is the owner. He holds the restaurant, the secret recipe, the building, and all the money that flows through it. SpongeBob is the worker. He does the actual cooking, flipping every single Krabby Patty with joy in his heart, hour after hour after hour. The customers love the food, the restaurant thrives, and the money pours in. And how much of that money does SpongeBob, the one doing the real work, actually take home? Almost none of it. The show jokes again and again about how little he is paid, how Mr. Krabs squeezes every coin and hands his hardest worker the smallest possible reward. Right there, the people who hold this theory say, is the exact picture Marx was describing. The owner grows rich, the worker does the labor, and gets next to nothing. What makes the theory feel so strong is how perfectly SpongeBob himself fits the role of the ideal worker, the kind a greedy owner could only dream of. SpongeBob does not complain. He does not ask for more money. He does not grumble about long hours or unfair pay. He genuinely loves his job, treats every shift as a gift, and would happily work for free if it came to that. In the eyes of the theory, this makes him the perfect example of a worker who has been so thoroughly shaped by the system that he cannot even see how little he is getting. He has been taught to find pure joy in his work, which conveniently means he never thinks to question the tiny paycheck. A worker that happy and that loyal is the easiest worker in the world to underpay, and Mr. Krabs takes full advantage of it. There is a famous episode that the people who believe this theory point to again and again, an episode that seems to act it all out. In it, SpongeBob and Squidward have to deliver a pizza, and the journey turns into a long and miserable trek through the wilderness. Squidward suffers the entire way, complaining and despairing, dragged down by how pointless and exhausting the whole task is. SpongeBob, meanwhile, marches along with a grin, singing a cheerful little song about Krusty Krab pizza the entire time, treating the dreadful errand as a delight. The way the theory reads this, Squidward is the worker who has started to see the truth, the one who knows he is being used and resents it, while SpongeBob is the worker so devoted to his boss's business that he sings its praises even while suffering, never noticing that his love for the job is being used against him. His joy comes before his own safety and comfort, which is exactly the point the theory wants to make. The character of Mr. Krabs gives the theory even more to work with, because his entire personality is built around the love of money. He is greedy to the point of cartoonish absurdity. He cares about coins more than he cares about people, sometimes even more than he cares about his own daughter. The show returns over and over to the image of Mr. Krabs panicking over a lost nickel, weeping over money, treating his wealth as the most precious thing in the world. To the people who hold this theory, Mr. Krabs is a walking, talking picture of an owner who has let the hunger for profit swallow everything else, including his decency and his relationship. His greed is so extreme that it stops being a personal flaw and starts looking like a comment on what the pursuit of money does to a person. The theory does not stop with SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs either. It pulls in the long rivalry between the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket and reads that as a point about how businesses really compete. In the simple story most people are told, businesses compete by making better product, and the best one wins fairly. The cartoon, the theory argues, shows something messier and more honest. The Krusty Krab is the wildly successful restaurant, and the Chum Bucket is the failing one across the street. The Chum Bucket does not try to win by making a better burger. Plankton tries to win by stealing the secret recipe, by trickery, by schemes and sneaking and sabotage. In the eyes of the theory, this is the cartoon quietly admitting that competition between businesses is often a dirty fight over who can grab the advantage, not a clean race to make the best thing. One big restaurant dominates the town, and the other tries to claw its way up through theft rather than honest improvement. There are even specific episodes that seem to put workers and bosses into direct conflict, and the theory treats these as the clearest evidence of all. In one, the workers at the Krusty Krab grow so fed up with how Mr. Krabs treats them that they stop working in protest, refusing to keep laboring under such unfair conditions. The very title of that episode points right at the idea of workers standing up against their boss. To the people who study the show this way, an episode about workers laying down their tools and demanding better treatment is about as direct a statement as a children's cartoon could possibly make about the struggle between those who own and those who labor. This way of seeing the show is not limited to casual viewers chatting online. It has been been written about in serious places. A well-known website once published a piece arguing exactly this, claiming that the show reveals the whole idea of fair business competition to be something close to a joke, with one giant restaurant ruling the town and a desperate rival trying to siphon away its customers through theft and trickery rather than a better product. Beyond that, actual academic papers have been written, the kind produced by students and scholars at universities, studying particular episodes through this lens. These papers look at the show and describe Mr. Krabs as a clear example of an owner squeezing his workers, and they treat SpongeBob and Squidward as the laborers caught underneath that squeezing. The fact that the show has drawn this kind of careful, written study is part of what gives the theory its weight. It is not only fans goofing around, it is people thinking hard about what the cartoon might be saying. Now, a fair and honest look at all this requires holding two thoughts at once. The theory is clever, and the evidence inside the show is real. SpongeBob truly is underpaid. Mr. Krabs truly is obsessed with money. The pizza episode truly does contrast a suffering worker with a blissfully loyal one. Those moments exist, plain as day, for anyone to see. At the same time, there is no proof that the people who made the show sat down intending to hide a grand message about money and power inside it. The show was built first and foremost to be funny. Mr. Krabs is greedy because a greedy crab is a great source of jokes, not necessarily because the writers wanted to teach children a lesson about owners and workers. Much of what the theory finds may be the natural result of building comedy around a stingy boss and a cheerful employee, rather than a secret plan to slip a hidden teaching past young eyes. That uncertainty is part of what makes the theory so interesting, rather than something to simply accept or reject. A story can carry meaning that its makers never fully intended. When a writer builds a greedy boss and a happy, underpaid worker purely for laugh, they may accidentally create a perfect little picture of something much larger, simply because that setup rings true to how the world often works. The reason the jokes land is that people recognize something real inside them. Audiences laugh at Mr. Krabs underpaying SpongeBob because plenty of them know, deep down, what it feels like to work hard for someone who keeps most of the reward. The comedy works because it touches a truth, and that truth is exactly what the theory points at. There is also something striking about which character so many grown-up viewers come to relate to as they get older. As children, most people love SpongeBob, the bouncy, joyful hero at the center of everything. As those same children grow up and start working real jobs, a surprising number of them find themselves feeling less like SpongeBob and more like Squidward, the worker who is tired, underappreciated, and quietly certain that he deserves better than what he is getting. That shift is part of why this theory resonates so strongly. The show seems to grow up alongside its audience, with the cheerful worker speaking to the child and the weary, disillusioned worker speaking to the adult that child becomes. The same cartoon means one thing at age 7 and something heavier at age 25, and the theory gives a name to that change. In the end, the value of this whole way of looking at the show is not really about proving that SpongeBob is secretly a lesson about money and power. The value is in how it makes a person look more closely at something they thought they understood completely. A cartoon they had watched 100 times suddenly has new corners to explore, new questions humming under familiar scenes. Whether or not the creators meant any of it, the theory turns a simple comfort show into something worth thinking about, a place where greed and labor and fairness quietly play out under the bright colors. And that is its own kind of proof of how deep the show runs, that grown adults can find a serious conversation about the world tucked inside a story about a sponge who flips burgers. The same gap appears here that has appeared all along. A bright, silly surface sits on top of something more grown-up and more serious, waiting for anyone who looks past the colors. Here, the hidden layer was a quiet argument about money and work, a sharp idea about owners and laborers buried inside a happy little restaurant by the sea, whether anyone planted it there on purpose or not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Reading hidden meaning into the show has mostly been a friendly game, played by fans and scholars who find it interesting to dig. There came a moment, though, when the question of what SpongeBob secretly stood for stopped being a game entirely. In one country, far from where the show was made, powerful people decided the cheerful sponge was dangerous to children, a threat hiding behind a smile, and they tried to wipe him off the screen for good. Section 7. The country that tried to ban him. A cartoon sponge does not seem like the sort of thing a whole government would worry about. He flips burgers, he laughs at his own joke, he plays with jellyfish in a field, and he goes to bed happy every night. He is about as gentle and harmless as any character ever drawn. And still, in the year 2012, in a country far from where the show was made, a serious group of officials decided that this cheerful little sponge was a genuine danger to children. They looked at SpongeBob SquarePants and saw a threat hiding behind the smile, something they believed was quietly harming the young people who watched it. They wanted him gone from their screens, and they were prepared to take real steps to make it happen. The country was Ukraine, a large nation in Eastern Europe. At the time, Ukraine had a special group whose job was to watch over the films, shows, and other media reaching its people, checking everything against the country's rules about what was was considered proper and decent. This group carried a long and official-sounding name, the National Expert Commission for Protecting Public Morality. Their task was to act as a kind of guardian, deciding what was acceptable for the public, and especially for children, and flagging anything they believed crossed a line. When a group like that takes an interest in something, it carries real weight because they have the power to push for things to be banned and pulled from the air. The trouble for SpongeBob did not start with the commission itself. It started with a report written by a separate group, a far-right religious organization with strong and strict views about morality. This group studied a number of popular cartoons and children's shows and decided that several of them were secretly harmful. They wrote up their concerns, and one of the shows they singled out was SpongeBob SquarePants. Their claim was that the cheerful sponge was being used to push a hidden message about being gay, that the friendly cartoon was quietly promoting a way of life they disapproved of, slipping it into the minds of impressionable children without their parents noticing. To this group, SpongeBob was not innocent at all. He was a quiet piece of propaganda dressed up in bright colors. The report did not stop with SpongeBob either. It cast a wide net, accusing a whole list of beloved shows of harming children in one way or another. Other famous cartoons were named alongside the sponge, including a show about a talking dog family, a long-running yellow cartoon family, a series about little creatures that battle each other, and a group of round, colorful characters made for toddlers. The report painted these shows as part of a larger, frightening plan. It described them, in dramatic terms, as a giant experiment being run on the country's children, an effort to turn them into criminals and into people of poor character. It was a sweeping and alarming accusation, treating a lineup of ordinary cartoons as though they were tools in some dark scheme to ruin a generation. When this report reached the Morality Commission, the officials there decided to take it seriously rather than wave it away. The claims were judged to be important enough that the commission announced it would hold a special meeting, a session set aside specifically to investigate whether these cartoons should be banned from the country. This is the part that turned a strange report into genuine news. A fringe group complaining about cartoons is one thing. A government body announcing a formal session to investigate banning those cartoons is something else entirely. It meant the accusations against SpongeBob had climbed from the edges of society into the halls of real power, where they might actually lead somewhere. The reasons given for suspecting SpongeBob were thin and strange when held up to the light. Some of the worry leaned on the warm friendship between SpongeBob and Patrick, the easy affection between the two best friends. Some of it leaned on small details that had been read into far more than they could honestly bear. There was no real evidence inside the show of any hidden message, no secret lesson tucked into the episode, nothing the writers had actually placed there. The accusations were built on suspicion and interpretation, on adults looking at a children's cartoon and deciding it must mean something sinister, rather than on anything the show genuinely said or did. The case against the sponge was made of fears, not fact. It is worth pausing on how oddly the report treated some of the other shows it named, because it reveals how far the thinking had stretched. The series about little battling creatures was lumped in as harmful, the long-running yellow family was treated as a danger, and the show about the round, colorful toddler characters received perhaps the strangest criticism of all. The report claimed that this gentle baby show put children into a kind of trance, and it described a typical young viewer of that show in deeply insulting terms, painting the child as someone who would sit slack-jawed in front of the screen, mindlessly swallowing whatever it fed them. When a report describes a toddler show in language that harsh, it becomes clear that the people behind it were seeing threats in nearly everything, treating ordinary children's entertainment as a parade of dangers. The whole episode says a great deal about the time and place it happened in, more than it says about SpongeBob himself. Ukraine in those years was a country with strict ideas about morality written into its rules, and the climate around certain topics was tense and heated. A cartoon became a convenient target for those tensions, a simple, recognizable thing that people could point at and argue over. SpongeBob, being one of the most famous cartoons on the planet, made an easy symbol. He was known everywhere, watched by countless children, and beloved by many, which is exactly what made him useful to a group that wanted to raise an alarm and be heard. Going after the most famous sponge in the world guaranteed attention in a way that going after some forgotten show never would. There is a sharp contrast worth noticing between this attempt and the way the show had been treated as a target before, in other parts of the world. Years earlier, in the United States, a powerful religious figure had also raised a worry about SpongeBob and a supposed gay message, sparking a loud national argument. But that earlier American storm was, in the end, mostly a battle of words and headlines, a fight over what the sponge supposedly stood for. The Ukrainian situation went a step further into the realm of real power, because it involved an actual government body with the authority to investigate banning the show outright. This was not just a famous person grumbling on a stage. This was officials with the ability to act, sitting down to decide whether millions of children would be allowed to keep watching their favorite cartoon. For the ordinary children of Ukraine, the strangest part of all of this is that nearly none of them had any idea it was happening. Kids kept tuning in to watch SpongeBob flip his burgers, chase his jellyfish, and bumble through his sunny days, completely unaware that grown-ups in serious rooms were arguing over whether their favorite show should be ripped away from them. The cartoon itself carried on exactly as always, never mentioning the fight, never changing a single frame in response. SpongeBob stayed as cheerful and clueless as ever. While far above his head, adults debated his secret meaning and his supposed dangers. The gap between the innocent thing on the screen and the heavy argument surrounding it could hardly have been wider. The accusations themselves crumble the moment a person looks at them honestly. SpongeBob was created to be funny and kind, a comfort for children and a joy for the people who made it. The man who created the show had said clearly, more than once, that the characters were never meant to carry any romantic message at all, that he saw them simply as friends and nothing more. There was no plan to influence children's beliefs about anything, no hidden agenda stitched into the episode. The idea that the show was a giant experiment to turn children into criminals was not grounded in anything the show actually contained. It was a fear projected onto a cartoon by people predisposed to find danger lurking everywhere they look. This whole strange chapter shows how a simple, friendly thing can become a screen onto which people throw their biggest fears. SpongeBob had no message about any of the things he was accused of carrying. He was a blank, cheerful surface, and different people in different places kept pouring their own worries into him. To some, he became a symbol of one thing. To others, a symbol of something else. The sponge himself meant none of it. He was simply popular enough and visible enough that whenever someone needed a target for a larger argument, he was right there, smiling, an easy place to aim. The fame that made children love him was the very same fame that made him useful to people who wanted to fight about something far bigger than a cartoon. There is a quiet lesson tucked inside this story about how fear can spread when it is given the right tools. A single report from a small group full of alarming claims and very little proof managed to climb all the way up to a government body and trigger a formal investigation into banning some of the most popular cartoons in the world. Fear travels fast when serious people decide to take it seriously, and once an official stamp gets placed on a worry, it can grow far beyond what the original evidence ever justified. A handful of strong claims about a sponge nearly turned into a real ban simply because the claims found their way into the right hands and were treated with a gravity they never earned. The same pattern that runs through this entire story appears here once more, only louder and with more power behind it. A gentle, simple cartoon sat on the surface, and beneath it, people kept finding things that were never really there. Meanings and dangers and hidden messages projected onto a smiling sponge. This time, the projecting was done by powerful officials in a serious room with the genuine ability to make a beloved show vanish from an entire country. The cartoon stayed silent in the middle of it all, as it always did, and let the adults far above the surface argue over a soul it never actually had. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The fight in Ukraine was about adults imagining a hidden message inside the sponge and trying to stamp it out. Years later, a very different kind of question about SpongeBob's hidden meaning came not from his enemies, but from a place much closer to home, and the answer touched on something that has puzzled fans for as long as the show has existed: the simple question of just how old this cheerful little sponge truly is. Section 8, How Old is SpongeBob Really Here? Is a question that sounds simple but has no clean answer, a puzzle that has quietly nagged at fans for the entire life of the show. How old is SpongeBob SquarePants? It seems like the kind of thing that should be easy to settle. He is the main character of one of the most watched cartoons ever made, on screen for decades, and yet his age has never been pinned down in a way that holds together. The show drops hints, the creator gave answers, and the clues point in directions that flatly contradict each other. The harder a person looks, the murkier it gets, until the only honest conclusion is that nobody, not even the people who made him, ever fully decided. The biggest clue comes from a moment many viewers blinked right past. In an early episode, there is a scene where SpongeBob's driving license is shown, the little card that proves a person is allowed to drive. Printed on that card is a date of birth. According to his license, SpongeBob was born on the 14th of July in the year 1986. There it is, a real date, right on an official-looking card inside the show. For a cartoon character whose age is usually a complete mystery, this felt like a genuine answer, a hard fact a fan could hold on to, and this was not a one-time slip either. The same birth date appeared again on his license in another episode, which made it seem solid, like something the show truly meant. The trouble starts the moment a person does a little simple math with that date. SpongeBob's show first aired in 1999. If he was born in 1986, then when the show began, he would have been only about 13 years old, a 13-year-old. That number causes all sorts of problems the moment it bumps up against the rest of the show. For one, SpongeBob holds down a full-time job at the Krusty Krab, cooking burgers for a living, which is not something a 13-year-old would normally be doing. For another, he is shown trying to earn a driving license, and in most places, a person has to be at least 16 to drive. A 13-year-old behind the wheel, working a grown-up job, does not fit. The birth date that seemed like a clean answer instead opened up a whole new tangle of questions. There was one detail that gave the show a way to wriggle out of the problem. The scene where the license first appeared was part of a dream. SpongeBob was asleep, and the license showed up inside his dreaming mind. Since a dream can show anything at all, true or not, some argued that the birth date could not really be trusted because it came from a place where the normal rules do not apply. That might have settled it and let everyone move on. The trouble is that the very same birth date then showed up again in a different episode, on his license once more, this time outside of any dream. So the date could not simply be brushed off as something his sleeping brain made up. It kept coming back, stubbornly, as though the show really did want it to mean something. When fans asked the creator about all this, his answers did not clear the fog so much as add to it in an interesting way. Steven Hillenburg, the man who made the show, said that SpongeBob does not actually have a fixed, specific age at all. The character was never meant to be locked to a single number. But he also gave a hint about how to think about him, explaining that SpongeBob is old enough to be living on his own and old enough to be going to driving school. With that simple description, the creator was pointing firmly away from the idea of SpongeBob being a child. A person who lives alone, pays for their own home, holds a job, and is learning to drive is, by any normal measure, an adult. So the creator's own words say the sponge is grown up, even while refusing to stamp an exact number on him. This creates a genuine clash between the clues. The license inside the show says he was born in 1986, which would make him a young teenager when the show started. The creator says he is an adult, old enough to live on his own. Both of these came from official places, and both cannot be neatly true at the same time if a person insists on doing the math by the calendar. The result is that SpongeBob exists in a strange in-between zone, carrying a printed birth date that says one thing and a creator's intention that says another, with no tidy way to make them agree. The creator even joked about the whole matter at one point, tossing out a playful answer when pressed. He suggested that SpongeBob is 50 years old in sponge years, a made-up way of measuring age that does not really translate to anything. It was clearly a joke, a way of dodging the question with a smile rather than giving a straight reply. But it carried a small grain of truth underneath the humor, because real sponges in the ocean can live for a very long time, well over 100 years for some kinds. By that silly logic, a 50-year-old sponge would actually be middle-aged, only halfway through a sponge's natural life. The joke was a way of saying that trying to measure a cartoon sponge's age in human years was a fool's errand to begin with. There is a real reason behind why the show kept things so foggy, and it goes back to the very beginning, to how the show was first sold to the network that aired it. When the creator first pitched SpongeBob, the people at the network had a worry. They felt that children watching at home might not be able to connect with a character who was a fully grown adult. Kids relate to other kids, the thinking went, and an adult sponge might feel too distant for the young audience the network wanted to reach. To solve this, a compromise was reached. SpongeBob would be given something to tie him to childhood, a way to make him feel relatable to kids. He was enrolled in a school, a place where he learns to drive a boat run by a teacher. That detail let the network feel comfortable that children could see a bit of themselves in him, since he still went to a kind of school like they did. That single choice is a big part of why his age is such a mess. He was deliberately built to feel like both things at once. On one hand, he lives alone, works a real job, and handles his own life like a grown-up. On the other hand, he goes to school, plays like a child, and bounces through the world with the wonder and silliness of a little kid. The creators wanted him to appeal to children and adults at the same time, and the easiest way to do that was to never fully commit to him being either one. He could be an adult when an adult was funny, and a child when a child was funny, and the show never had to choose. The fuzziness was useful. A character with no fixed age can be whatever the moment needs him to be. This is actually a smart and common trick in the world of cartoons, even if it leaves fans scratching their heads. Many cartoon characters never age at all, staying frozen exactly as they are, no matter how many years pass in the real world. SpongeBob takes this a step further by not even having a clear age to freeze. Keeping him ageless and undefined means he never grows old, never grows up, and never stops feeling fresh to each new wave of children who discover him. A child watching today meets the same SpongeBob a child met decades ago, untouched by time, as young or as grown as that child needs him to be. The vagueness is part of what has kept him relatable across so many years and so many generations. The behavior of SpongeBob himself only deepens the confusion because he so rarely acts like any single age. Most of the time, he behaves like an excited young child, obsessed with bubbles, toys, his pet snail, and the simple joys of a sunny day. He giggles, he plays, he treats the world with wide-eyed delight, and then, every so often, he slips into being a clear adult, especially at his job, where he is a skilled and serious professional who takes his cooking with real pride. He pays his bills, he owns his home, he shoulders grown-up responsibilities without complaint, so even his actions refuse to settle the question, swinging between childlike and adult depending entirely on what the story needs from him in that moment. Spin-off shows and later material have nudged at the question without ever truly closing it. Some of these newer projects suggest he is a fair bit older than the 13-year-old the license math would give, placing him somewhere in his 20s based on how he relates to other characters. His own grandmother has referred to him as a grown-up. The pieces that point toward adulthood have piled up over the years, slowly tilting the balance away from the idea of him being a child. Yet that printed birth date still sits there in those early episodes, refusing to vanish, a stubborn little fact that keeps the whole question from ever being fully resolved. In the end, the most honest answer to how old SpongeBob is happens to be the least satisfying one. He has no single, fixed age, and he was built that way on purpose. The driving license offers a date. The creator's words point toward adulthood. His behavior swings between child and grown-up, and none of it lines up into one clean number. The mystery is not a mistake or an oversight. It is a deliberate fog, kept in place because a character without a locked age can mean more to more people and last longer in their hearts. Trying to nail down exactly how old he is misses the point of why he was made so slippery in the first place. The familiar shape of this whole larger story shows up here too, in its own gentle way. On the surface sits a simple cartoon sponge, the kind of thing nobody thinks twice about. Underneath, waiting for anyone who pokes at it, sits a genuine puzzle with no clean solution, a small mystery the show has carried quietly since its earliest days. The bright, easy surface hides a question that even the people who made him chose to leave open forever, a tiny, unsolved riddle tucked inside the most familiar face in the show. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The question of SpongeBob's age circles back, in a way, to the man who dreamed him up and chose to leave him ageless. That same creator left another hidden mark on the show, one that plays at the start of every single episode and yet has been missed by nearly everyone who ever watched. A piece of the man himself is woven right into the opening, singing the same song millions of children have sung along to for decades, and almost none of them ever realized whose voice and whose face they were truly seeing. Section 9. The pirate who sings the theme is the creator. Every single episode of SpongeBob SquarePants begins the same way. Before the story starts, before SpongeBob wakes up or heads to work, a face appears on the screen. It is the face of an old pirate, painted into a picture, with curly hair, an eye patch over one eye, a parrot perched on his shoulder, and a wide grin. He looks straight out at the viewer and calls out, asking if the kids are ready. Then he launches into the famous theme song, the one nearly everyone alive can sing at least a few words of, the one that asks, who lives in a pineapple under the sea? That pirate has greeted hundreds of millions of people, over and over, for decades, and hidden inside him is one of the best kept secrets the show ever had. The pirate has a name. He is called Painty the Pirate, and he is exactly what he appears to be, a painting. He is a picture of a pirate's head set inside a golden frame, with a calm sea and a blue sky stretching out behind him. Almost nothing about him moved. The painting stays still, frozen the way any painting would be. There is one exception though, one part of him that comes alive. His mouth moves. As he sings the theme song, his lips part and shift and form the words, while the rest of him stays as still as paint on a canvas. That moving mouth is the strange little heart of the whole opening, the thing that makes a still painting seem to sing. The reason his mouth can move is the secret. That mouth is not painted at all. It is a real, living human mouth, a real pair of lips filmed in the real world and then placed right onto the painting, so that the still picture appears to talk and sing. When a person watches Painty open his mouth to ask if the kids are ready, they are looking at actual human lips, not a drawing. And here is the part that almost nobody ever knew. Those lips belong to Steven Hillenburg, the man who created the entire show. The creator himself is hiding inside the opening of every episode, his own mouth singing the song, performing in his own creation, right in front of an audience that never recognized him. Think about how remarkable that is for a moment. Steven Hillenburg dreamed up the whole world of Bikini Bottom. He designed SpongeBob, drew the early versions of all the characters, built the town, and shaped the heart of the show. And then, at the very front of every episode, he tucked a piece of himself directly into the screen, his own lips moving along to the theme song, where every viewer would see them thousands of times without ever realizing. He was there the whole time, in plain sight, performing a small hidden role in the thing he had made. A creator does not usually get to literally appear inside his own cartoon, but Hillenburg found a quiet, clever way to do exactly that. This detail did not stay completely hidden forever. It was eventually shared through special features on some of the show's home releases, the little behind-the-scenes extras that come packaged with DVDs to show fans how things were made. On those features, the truth about Painty's mouth was explained, that the real lips in the painting were the lips of the show's creator. So the secret was confirmed by the show itself, told straight to the fans who cared enough to dig into the extras. Still, most casual viewers never watched those features and never found out. For them, Painty stayed a simple cartoon pirate, and the creator's hidden performance went right on slipping past them, episode after episode. The pirate is more than just a moving mouth though. He has a full voice, a hearty pirate voice that carries the song, and that voice came from a real performer too. The voice of Painty the Pirate belongs to a man named Patrick Pinney, a voice actor who lent the painting its cheerful, salty sound. So Painty is actually a blend of two different people. His mouth comes from Steven Hillenburg, the creator, and his voice comes from Patrick Pinney, the performer. Two real men combined into one painted pirate, one supplying supplying the lips that move and the other supplying the words that come out. It is a strange little patchwork, a single character stitched together from pieces of two different people. The song that Painty sings has its own surprising story, deeper than most people would ever guess from how simple and silly it sounds. The theme song is built in the style of an old kind of music called a sea shanty. A sea shanty is the sort of song that sailors long ago would sing together while working on their ships, a rhythmic, sing-along tune meant to keep a group moving in time and lift their spirits during hard labor. These songs often go back and forth, with one person singing a line and a group answering back. The SpongeBob theme follows that exact old pattern. Painty sings out a line, and a group of children answers him, calling back the show's name again and again. It is an ancient style of music, the music of working sailors, dressed up and pointed at a cartoon sponge. The song did not appear out of nowhere either. It was modeled on a particular old sea song, an existing shanty that gave the SpongeBob theme its bones and its bounce. The creators took the feel of that traditional sailor's tune and shaped their own song on top of it, keeping the call and answer rhythm and the rollicking energy while filling it with new words about a sponge under the sea. So the catchiest part of the entire show, the tune burned into the memory of countless people, traces its roots back to the kind of song that real sailors once bellowed on the decks of ships long ago. A children's cartoon reached all the way back to old seafaring music and pulled a piece of it into the modern world. Writing the song was a team effort, and knowing who did what reveals how much care went into something most people treat as a throwaway jingle. The actual music, the melody, and the tune itself was put together by two musicians, Blaze Smith and Mark Harrison. The words, the lyrics that everyone sings along to, came from two other people deeply tied to the show. One was Steven Hillenburg, the creator, the same man whose lips appear on Painty. The other was Derek Dryman, a person who helped guide the creative side of the show in its early days. So the creator did double duty on the opening, lending both his mouth to the pirate and his words to the song. His fingerprints are all over those 40-odd seconds at the start of every episode, in the lips a person sees and the lyrics they hear. The voices answering Painty in the song belong to children, a small chorus of young singers who shout back the show's name during the call and answer. This adds yet another layer of real people hiding inside the opening. Over the years, there has been some uncertainty about exactly which children sang those parts, with different people claiming the honor, including the child of one of the show's animators. The exact identities stayed a bit fuzzy, but the point holds that the cheerful young voices ringing out in the theme were real kids, recorded and placed into the song. The opening that feels so polished and timeless was assembled from a handful of real human pieces, grown-up mouths and children's voices, all woven together into something that sounds effortless. It is worth sitting with how unusual the whole construction of the opening really is. Most cartoon openings are simply animated, drawn the same way the rest of the show is drawn, with cartoon characters singing cartoon songs. The SpongeBob opening breaks that pattern by placing a real human mouth onto a painted pirate, mixing the real world and the drawn world together in a way that feels slightly odd once a person notices it. There is something a little uncanny about Painty, a sense that something is not quite normal about him, and the reason is that a viewer's eyes are catching the difference between the still painting and the living mouth even before their brain understands why. The creators built a small, strange piece of real life into the front of a cartoon, and it has been quietly tugging at viewers for decades. The choice to use a real mouth was a creative gamble that paid off in a way few people consciously appreciate. By giving Painty real lips, the opening gained a strange charm, a homemade, handmade quality that set it apart from every other cartoon opening. It felt different, a little weird, a little special, and that difference helped lodge it in people's memories. An entirely drawn pirate singing the song would have been forgettable, just one more animated face among thousands. A painting with a real human mouth was something nobody had quite seen before, and that strangeness gave the opening a hook that has held tight across the years. The oddness was a strength, even if the people watching never figured out what made it feel so distinct. This whole secret connects beautifully to the larger truth about how personal this show was for the people who made it. Steven Hillenburg did not simply oversee the show from a distance. He poured himself into it directly, in ways big and small. He designed the characters, he wrote the words of the theme song, and he literally placed his own mouth into the opening of every episode, performing a hidden role in his own creation. That level of personal involvement, that willingness to climb inside the work and become a small piece of it, says a great deal about how much the show meant to him. It was not a job he handed off. It was something he built with his own hands and his own face, leaving pieces of himself scattered throughout it. The hidden mouth also fits a pattern that runs all through the making of the show, the pattern of real people quietly tucked into the cartoon. The creator hid his wife's name and humor in a character. He surrounded himself with people whose real lives shaped the show, and in the opening, he hid his own lips singing the theme. Time and again, the people who made SpongeBob left little personal marks inside it, secrets in plain sight, waiting for the rare, curious fan to uncover them. The show became one of the most famous cartoons in the world, watched by enormous numbers of people, and yet these intimate little touches fishes stayed hidden behind the bright colors, known only to those who went looking. There is something almost touching about a creator hiding his own mouth in the opening of his life's great work. Steven Hillenburg passed away some years after the show became a phenomenon, but his lips go on singing at the start of every episode, frozen into that painting, greeting each new viewer the way they always have. A piece of him remains in the show forever, performing the same small role over and over, long after he himself is gone. Every time a child sings along to the theme, asking who lives in a pineapple under the sea, they are singing along with the actual mouth of the man who imagined the whole thing. He left a part of himself behind, woven permanently into the beginning of his creation, and there it will stay for as long as the show endures. Knowing this changes the simple act of watching the opening. What once seemed like an ordinary cartoon pirate singing an ordinary cartoon song becomes something layered and personal. The viewer suddenly sees the creator hiding inside the painting, his real lips moving, his written words in the song, the old sea shanty roots beneath the tune, the children answering back, the whole thing assembled from real human pieces by people who cared deeply about what they were making. The opening does not change at all. The knowledge changes everything about how it feels. A throwaway 40 seconds at the start of each episode turns out to be one of the richest, most personal corners of the entire show, packed with secrets that hid in plain sight for years. The cleverness of it also speaks to how much thought went into even the smallest parts of the show. The creators could have slapped together any simple opening and moved on. Instead, they reached back to old sailor music, wrote original words shaped to fit that ancient style, filmed a real mouth, recorded real children, and stitched it all into something that felt both brand new and strangely timeless. That care, poured into a piece of the show most people barely think about, is part of why SpongeBob has lasted so long and felt so alive. The people behind it sweated the details that nobody asked them to sweat, and that hidden effort seeped through the screen, even when viewers could not name what made the show feel so carefully crafted. The same gap that runs through this entire story appears once more in Painty the Pirate. On the surface sits a simple, cheerful cartoon pirate, the kind of thing a child sees and forgets, singing a silly little song to open a silly little show. Just beneath that surface hides something far more interesting: the creator's own mouth. An old style of sailor music, a patchwork of real people, and a level of care that most viewers never suspected. The bright and easy front concealed a small, rich secret, sitting there in plain view at the start of every episode, missed by nearly everyone who ever watched it begin. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The creator hid himself inside the opening, a quiet personal mark left in plain sight. He also left a far larger mystery behind, one that has puzzled fans for the entire life of the show, and that the creator himself stubbornly refused to ever solve. It sits inside the family, at the very center of the Krusty Krab, in the strange and impossible bond between a greedy little crab and the towering creature he calls his daughter. A riddle the show has dangled in front of viewers for decades, while quietly refusing to ever explain how such a thing could possibly be. Section 10. The Whale Who Shouldn't Exist. Mr. Krabs is a crab. This is the most basic fact about him, baked right into his name and his whole design. He has the shell, the claws, the beady eyes on stalks, the scuttling little walk. He is, beyond any doubt, a crab. And Mr. Krabs has a daughter. He loves her. He frets over her. He wants her to one day take over the family restaurant. Her name is Pearl, and she lives with him in their home, a teenage girl growing up under the watchful eye of her crabby father. There is one small problem with this perfectly ordinary family picture, a problem so obvious that it is almost invisible. Pearl is not a crab. Pearl is a whale, an enormous, towering whale, many times the size of her tiny father, looming over him like a mountain over a pebble. Stop and really look at that for a moment, because the show never asks anyone to. A small crab is the father of a giant whale. The two of them could not possibly look more different. Mr. Krabs is a hard-shelled little creature who could fit in a person's hand. Pearl is a massive sea mammal who dwarfs him in every scene they share. They walk through episode after episode as father and daughter, and the show treats it as the most natural thing in the world. Nobody in Bikini Bottom ever stops to point out how strange it is. No character raises an eyebrow. The cartoon simply presents a crab and a whale as a normal family and dares the audience to question it, which, for years, hardly anyone did. Once a person does notice, though, the question becomes impossible to shake. How on earth can a crab be the father of a whale? It breaks every rule a person understands about how families work. A creature has babies that look like itself. A crab should have a crab for a child. The fact that Mr. Krabs has a whale for a daughter is a riddle sitting right at the heart of the show, hidden in plain sight, woven into the family at the very center of the Krusty Krab. For an enormous number of fans, this became one of the show's most famous mysteries, the kind of thing that, once seen, can never be unseen. The most natural guess people reach for is that Pearl must be adopted. If a crab cannot give birth to a whale, then surely Mr. Krabs took her in some other way, raising a young whale who was not truly his own flesh and blood. This explanation is tidy and makes a kind of sense, solving the problem in one one clean stroke. The trouble is that the show pushes back against it. Mr. Krabs has, at times, spoken of Pearl as his own flesh and blood, treating her as his real, biological daughter rather than a child he adopted. So the simplest answer runs into a wall. The show seems to insist, in its own offhand way, that Pearl genuinely is his daughter by blood, which only deepens the puzzle rather than solving it. The real explanation for why Pearl is a whale at all has nothing to do with the story inside the show and everything to do with how the show was built. When Steven Hillenburg was first creating his characters, he made a deliberate choice. He wanted each member of the main cast to be a different kind of animal. He did not want a town full of similar-looking creatures. He wanted variety, a colorful mix of different sea life, so that each character would look distinct and interesting next to the others. A sponge, a starfish, a crab, a squid-shaped octopus, a tiny speck of plankton, and so on. Every main character got a different creature. So when it came time to give Mr. Krabs a daughter, Hillenburg reached for yet another animal entirely, and he landed on a whale. There was a personal reason behind the whale, tied to the creator's own life and his deep love of the ocean. Pearl was actually the second main character Hillenburg ever created for the show, and the idea for her came to him while he was working at a place dedicated to the sea. There, among other duties, he looked after a whale skeleton on display and helped guide whale watching trips, where people go out to spot real whales in the water. Surrounded by whales in his work, with their bones and their watching trips a regular part of his days, the creature was clearly on his mind. So when he needed a new animal for Mr. Krabs' daughter, the whale he had been living alongside in his ocean job felt like a natural pick. His real life and his real love of whales fed straight into the choice. As for why a whale specifically suited the daughter of a crab, part of the answer is simply that the mismatch is funny. The idea of a tiny crab having an enormous whale for a daughter carries a built-in joke in the sheer size difference. A little father and a towering child make a comical pair, the kind of visual gag that works without anyone needing to explain it. The creator wanted each character to be a different animal, and pairing the smallest sort of father with one of the largest possible children produced a contrast that was amusing all on its own. The strangeness was a feature, a source of gentle comedy. Even if it created a riddle the show would never bother to answer. That brings up the most important point about this whole mystery. The show, on purpose, has never explained it inside an episode. In all the years SpongeBob has been on the air, across hundreds of episodes, the question of how a crab fathered a whale has never been directly answered in the story itself. This was not an accident or an oversight. The creator received many letters from fans over the years, people writing in to ask for the answer, begging for an origin story that would finally explain Pearl and how she came to be part of the Krabs family. And the creator, by the accounts of those who worked with him, was very much against ever solving the mystery. He did not want to explain it. He liked leaving it open, dangling there, unanswered on purpose. There is a real reason a creator might choose to leave a mystery like that alone, and it is worth understanding. Some questions are more fun unanswered than answered. The strangeness of a crab with a whale daughter is charming precisely because it is never explained, because it sits there as a delightful oddity the audience can wonder about forever. The moment a show pins down a hard, official answer, the wondering stops, and a little bit of the magic drains away. By refusing to solve it, the creator kept the mystery alive, kept fans talking and guessing and theorizing for decades. An open question keeps a show interesting in a way a closed one never can. He understood that, and he guarded the mystery rather than killing it with an explanation. There is, however, one small piece of an answer that exists outside the show, in material the creators put out separately. A trivia book about the show, released around the year 2000 and written by a former writer of the series, touched on the question. According to that book, Pearl takes after her mother, who was also a whale. This little detail offers a possible solution. If Mr. Krabs was once married to a whale, then Pearl could be the daughter of a crab father and a whale mother, and she simply ended up looking entirely like her mother's side. That would let her be Mr. Krabs' true biological daughter, his real flesh and blood, while explaining why she looks nothing like him at all. She got her mother's whale shape rather than her father's crab one. This idea of a whale mother opens up its own quiet little mystery, because that mother is almost never seen or mentioned in the show. There is a figure understood to be Pearl's mother, also a whale, but what happened to her, where she is, and how she and Mr. Krabs came together are all left blank. She hovers at the edges of the story, implied but absent, a missing piece of the Krabs family that the show never fills in. So even the partial answer, the whale mother who explains Pearl's appearance, comes wrapped in fresh questions of its own. The more a person tugs at the thread, the more loose ends appear, until the whole thing feels like a mystery designed never to be fully untangled. It is worth appreciating how cleverly the show handles all of this by simply refusing to acknowledge it. The cartoon never treats the crab and whale family as strange. It plays every father-daughter scene completely straight, with Mr. Krabs fussing over Pearl and Pearl rolling her eyes at her old-fashioned dad, exactly the way any ordinary family might. By never drawing attention to the oddness, the show makes the audience accept it without thinking, at least at first. The strangeness only surfaces when a viewer steps steps back and really looks. And by then, they are already attached to the family and willing to let the impossibility slide. It is a small magic trick, getting people to accept a crab and a whale as blood relatives simply by acting as though there is nothing to question. This mystery became one of the show's most beloved puzzles precisely because it is so simple and so impossible at the same time. A person does not need to study the show closely to spot it. They only need to notice that one character is a small crab and his daughter is a giant whale. The contradiction is right there on the surface, plain as day, and yet it slips past most people because the show never points at it. Fans have spent years discussing it, arguing over whether Pearl is adopted, whether there was a whale mother, what happened to her, and how the whole thing could possibly work. Entire conversations and videos have been built around this one question, all of it fueled by a mystery the creator deliberately chose never to close. The way the creator guarded this mystery says something about how he thought about his show. He could easily have written an episode explaining Pearl's origins and put the question to rest forever. He had the power to do it, and plenty of fans were asking for it. He chose not to, again and again, holding the line against solving it. He understood that the show was more delightful with a few unanswered questions humming inside it, that a little mystery kept the world feeling deep and alive. A creator confident enough to leave a famous question dangling, knowing it would frustrate and fascinate fans for years, was a creator who trusted the strangeness of his own creation. He let Bikini Bottom keep its secret. There is also something fitting about this particular mystery sitting at the center of the show's most money-obsessed character. Mr. Krabs cares about wealth above almost everything, and yet the one thing he treasures more than money is his daughter Pearl. The strange, impossible bond between the tiny, greedy crab and his enormous whale daughter is one of the few places where Mr. Krabs shows real, soft love. He guards her and dotes on her in a way he guards and dotes on nothing else except his coins. So the riddle of how she came to be is wrapped around the warmest part of an otherwise cold character, the one relationship that proves there is a heart beating somewhere under all that greed. The mystery is not just strange, it sits right on top of the most tender thing in his whole life. Knowing the truth behind the mystery changes how a person sees it, even though the truth is partly that there is no full answer. The crab and whale family exists because a creator wanted variety in his cast and reached for a whale he loved from his real life in the ocean. The lack of an explanation exists because that same creator believed some questions are better left open. The hint of a whale mother exists in a book outside the show, offering a possible solution while raising new questions. All of it together turns a simple, silly oddity into something richer, a deliberate choice to keep a piece of the world mysterious, made by a person who understood the value of leaving a little wonder unexplained. The same gap that has run through this whole story shows up here one final time. On the surface sits a normal cartoon family, a father and his teenage daughter, nothing worth a second glance. Just beneath that surface sits an impossibility, a crab who somehow fathered a whale, a riddle the show has dangled for decades while stubbornly refusing to ever resolve it. The bright, simple front hides a deliberate mystery, planted on purpose and guarded on purpose, sitting in plain view at the heart of the most famous restaurant in the sea, waiting for anyone who finally stops to ask how such a strange little family could possibly be real. Across all 10 of these stories, the same shape has appeared again and again. A cheerful, simple surface has rested on top of something stranger, deeper, or more carefully built underneath. A real courtroom battle over a pretend restaurant, a missing first episode, and a song nobody could keep. An episode that reached too far into the dark. Real people hidden inside the cast. A creature wearing the wrong name. A quiet argument about money and work. A country that feared a sponge. A hero with no real age. A creator's own face singing the theme. And a family held together by an impossible, unexplained bond. The whole task that remains is to gather all of these scattered threads into a single hand and see what the full picture, taken together, finally reveals about one little cartoon and the millions of people who have loved it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.